are just what makes in our mind, both CJ and I are teachers, are former teachers ourselves, and part of what is exciting about the film is being able to present these primary resources to Americans, and we couldn't have done that without the support of librarians who are amazing. And all y'all on this call already probably know that, but it's just wanted to make sure we shouted out how essential the public library system was to actually getting this film done.
Shout out to teachers and librarians. Yeah, everyone on this call is like, yeah, we love library. You would be surprised at how many librarians in the 6 years of making this film were like, what is it that you need? You need 3 pages from an 1861 book that is crumbling. And then they would scan it and I'd be like, I can't read this. And they'd be like, that's because the pages are going to fall apart if I scan it again. Let me get an interlibrary loan from someplace else. So y'all are really superheroes. And thank you.
I mean, does anyone have any questions? We're getting, people are this. Thank you. So authentic, so powerful. CJ, your dad must be so proud of you. Bob Karp asks, how did being at Charlottesville change your plans for the documentary? It's a powerful change in mood.
Darcy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I'm the voice that you hear throughout the film, occasionally warning CJ not to do things, and you
Guardian
don't hear
Angel, producer / Guardian Angel. Is this safe for your life?
Yeah, please. I don't want to be the one to tell your dad what happened here. But you don't hear the conversation that we had with Abdulaziz, our friend, when he was preparing to go to the Unite the Right rally, and invited CJ to come with him. And I was really deeply concerned about it. And it turns out it was right to be concerned that it was not a safe place. But I think we were kind of storm chasers at that moment. Up until Lee was removed, we'd been spending the nights in the neutral ground, waiting for, the statues to pop off, and just like, we had Google alerts, and we were, texting each other in groups anytime there'd be a rumor of a statue coming off. And it was kind of our mode was like, we're going to capture it, we're going to get it. So it felt, I think, for CJ, an organic extension of what we'd been doing. And we were riding high because Lee had come down. We were like, this is let's go to the next city and let's see what happens. And then, obviously that was a moment that provided a real emotional shift and kind of established what the stakes of this kind of work are. And so I'm glad that CJ was there. As a friend of his, I wish he hadn't been there, and I didn't want him to go, but obviously it was key to the story we were telling.
It also made it impossible to end the story as we wanted to end. We wanted to end the story with the hopeful shot of Lee, of the empty pedestal in New Orleans, and Lee is gone. And I think that is the way a lot of our civil rights stories end. We as a nation, and specifically I think white Americans, love the idea of reconciliation more than we love reckoning. We love a happy ending. Every story that we tell about the civil rights movement almost always ends with like the March on Washington and then, shot of an integrated classroom. I think the stories we gravitate to as a nation are redemptive, happy ending. The people rose up against the racism and the racists got washed away and we march on. That was an impossible way to end this film after Charlottesville. Charlottesville happened in August, just a couple months after the removals that you saw in May. So I think we were really haunted in the whole back half of this film for years after making this film of how do you have a suitable ending that doesn't allow people to go, yay, we beat the bad guys. And oh my God, the bad guys are with us. Oh my God, we raised some of these bad guys. We raised some of these bad guys by teaching white children that race doesn't exist and that we're all equal. And we didn't give them the tools to understand that racism still exists. So I think, yeah, I am sad that we were there because, there was a lot of tragedy there, but I'm glad that we were there just because it is important to show that type of stuff on film. That racists aren't something that are going away. This is something that is on the ascension in this country. And you can feel it in that footage, they feel powerful. They are saying whose streets. They think that this world is theirs. And I think it's all of our job. And I think the thing that brought a lot of you to this call is how do we resist that? How do we tell stories about the past and stories about our present that remind these folks that they are not the norm and the world is not theirs?
A lot of people are making comments that they were shocked by all the different stories that were out there. Denise Leslie, who manages our Black Voices book group and is on the board of Paul Robeson House, asks, the language of slavery wasn't that bad. They got food, clothing, shelter, and Medicare. That was news to me. And then she says, was that news to you, CJ and Darcy?
Was it news that slavery was actually pretty good? Yeah, that's news to me. That is big time news to me. I did not think about it as free medical care and a robust housing program. I had never framed it that way. It was wild. I mean, I saw some of you reacting to that. I grew up in the North. We have our own weird set. I grew up in Boston and New York. We have our own weird set of myths, which include those pilgrims were great and they got along great with the Indians. No, they killed most of them. And, Columbus, 1492, we learn about 1492 and like never once do we bring up the word genocide with kids. And it's like, yeah, that's what he did. So we have our own weird set of myths about the North. The main one being that Northerners were all anti-racist, and Lincoln and all of his anti-racist Northerners, this was about slavery from the beginning. It was not. But I was not ready I knew that the states' rights thing existed. I was not ready for the sheer amount and consistency of people who would open their mouths and say out loud to my face, slavery was not that bad. That was news.
I mean, I love it when someone is an accidental socialist, and in justifying, the Confederacy, they end up saying that universal health care is a right that we should want. But that particular language, and I think the learning moment for me as a Southerner and as someone who was raised with the beauty of the lost cause mythology as part of the pop culture around me growing up, the part of the consistency of the phrasing around slavery wasn't that bad was really shocking to me. It wasn't just that it was a thing that Thomas Taylor said, it was that people repeated it over and over, and you started to realize like this is being repeated somewhere, like in church, like so that people have these talking points available to them.
And I don't think it occurs to the folks who believe that how strange it is to make the argument both that this was not about slavery and also, on a totally unrelated note, slavery's not that bad.
It's not really
it's
bad.
Like, why are we even
if
talking
that were
about
what we
the
were
last
talking
slave?
about here? Right?
That's like that's like your friend saying to you, my wife divorced me. It had nothing to do with cheating. On an unrelated note, is cheating even that bad? You'd be like, Greg, what are we talking about? Why are you fixated on this cheating thing? So I think that, yes, it was a surprise. The deeper surprise was, as you saw from the film, that all of those speaking points come from the United Daughters of the Confederacy, who trained that into kids. And ultimately, I don't want people leaving this film hating Thomas Taylor. I want them understanding that Thomas Taylor is a product of an entire system that taught this to kids north and south as the truth until the 1970s.
Jim Blinn has a question. And also, if anyone would like to, instead of typing their question in, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask.
Show me your voice. Show me your face and voices.
Yes, thank you so much. One of the key things to me was that you had the information from the states, their secession and their leaders saying, oh, yes, this is really all about slavery. And I thought, that's a great thing. I'd like to see that collected somewhere so there was like a list, here's from each state and what they said. That would be really powerful, I think, to help people understand, yes, slavery was a focus from the beginning.
We're going to
Also
try to
had a
build that in,
question.
we're going to try to build that into our website. But yes, I
Yeah.
also dream of a thing where you can just search my state, Florida, what was said, and you can just see the founding documents, and you can see everything. You know, I would love to, and I'm sure you have a question as well. But just as an experiment, if your camera is on, can you raise your hand if you your physical hand? Can you raise your hand if you had seen any of those documents in your education? TJ has. Keep the hands up. I have certainly not. And to me, that was one of the strangest things, right? It is the one nation that has broken away from this country, the one. And we do not ever look at their founding documents? Even those raised in places where the mantra is the South is right. Great. If the South is right, can we study anything that they wrote besides some letter from Robert E. Lee? That is strange to me. That these men fashioned themselves as the forefathers of a new nation. They compared themselves to the forefathers of America. And just like America wrote down a Declaration of Independence, every one of these states wrote down a declaration of causes. Not just some random dude. These were conventions. They had hundreds, thousands of people at these conventions, and they had a scribe, and they got up and gave speeches, and then they did a summary, like many of you have, at the end of your meetings. Okay, what did we decide? And they wrote down it's the first thing listed in these documents. The first sentence will be like, "And we shall now make our reasons clear." We are firmly identified with the institution of slavery. It is the greatest material wealth on earth. And it's like, if we taught children 2 of those documents, would Charlottesville have even happened? Where I learned about the Magna Carta and Hammurabi's Code, and we have not studied the one government that caused the greatest split in our history. So I want to get back to your question, Jim, but I think, we are all of different ages on this call, and it means something that none of us have ever seen those documents, except for one person, and thank God that one person. Hopefully, if we were to have this call next year, hopefully a lot more people would raise their hand. Jim, what was your question?
Yeah, just to add on to what you said, I looked up something on Google about the Constitution of the Confederacy, and they compare how they basically borrowed our Constitution, except they added a whole bunch of stuff about slavery in there too.
For those of us in the North, Darcy, please.
I just wanted to say that one of the major arguments through the city council hearings and any place that's talking about removing statues, the people who want to preserve Confederate statues will say that it is history. The unwillingness to link those statues to the contextualizing primary source information of what they stood for. And there is an absolute, as you see in Thomas Taylor, they disambiguate the statues from the historical record. That itself proves that it's not history. What do you actually learn when you go to a statue of Robert E. Lee that doesn't have any history around it and contextualizing it? And so the unwillingness to put those things side by side proves the lie that those statues are not history. They were about pomp, circumstance, and power.
And I think, with those gentlemen, it's like, so you spent thousands of dollars to get the exact accurate rifle in the exact type of wool, but you are completely unaware of the founding documents of that nation. So I think for those of us located in the North, I think the harder thing to reckon with, it is easy for us to laugh and shake our heads and be like, oh, the South. The harder thing for us to reckon with is that the number one thing that every one of those secessionists were talking about is the fugitive slave clause. The fugitive slave clause in our Constitution. And you can search for this. That to them, they were saying, we have the right to secede because a promise is broken. And when a promise is broken, you can bounce, you can leave. And the promise that they are all referring to is that the Constitution guarantees people the right to have their slave returned to them if the slave escapes. That is the fugitive slave clause. It is baked into our Constitution. So while it's important for us to teach, yes, the South wrote all this stuff down, I think there's an inward look that needs to happen, particularly in northern schools, being like, these guys are referencing a freedom to have slaves that they didn't make up. This is something our founding fathers made up. This is something founded in our document. The same document that enshrines all of our ideas about liberty also guaranteed slave hunting as a foundation of this country. And I think all these dumb laws that are happening, that's a word I use for any law that is being passed for our kids to learn less history. All these Republican governors who are passing dumb laws and saying, teach our kids less, critical race theory, teach our kids less, they believe in a fragility of our children. And all of those of you who have children know our children are not fragile. Our children are able to understand Batman gets angry sometimes and he hurts people, but that's not the real Batman. You know, our children are able to understand complex people. So I think if you teach children in our schools, in Boston, the schools that I went to, if you teach them that our founding document enshrined slave hunting and our greatest freedoms, and America hangs in the balance between those two, I think our kids are not fragile, and I think they would understand that. All right, I'm off my soapbox. Who has another question?
No, thank you. I'd like to give Susan Conlon an opportunity, and then Carol Zimmerman. Susan.
So I'd like to take the challenge and express a question by voice.
Great.
Other people do it too.
Great.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you to speak about, and you know, this is to both of you in the film. Obviously, we see this expressed through you, CJ, but there's a scene later in the film near the end when you're talking to your dad, and he's challenging you, and you're talking about you know, this desire that, yeah, if we talk to people, if we come together with people with different points of view, we can change people's minds. Earlier in the film, when we see you with the Civil War reenactors, is that how you would describe them?
Yes.
There's a scene there where you're telling them that you're there, that you're coming out to talk to them, see things from their angle, to be part of their experience, to, you know, connect with them. But as soon as you suggested that, you know, maybe they would like to go to the Whitney, immediately, like, the wall went up. No, that wouldn't happen. And you had such a pained look on your face. Can you share a little bit more about what that experience was like, especially after, you know, what happened after that scene, or what was that like for you?
We went there because, you know, as you know, you can see it even in her face now. Darcy was not a fan of us going there. You know this from the film. She is my guardian angel, but, you know, I think Darcy's caution is right, and I think a lot of media fell into this trap in 2016 of, you know, trying to go talk about something illegitimate, and like Malcolm Super says in the film, accidentally legitimizing it, giving too much air. Mm-hmm. It was really important for us, though, for me, because we are not the news. We are a film about this century-old lie. And to me, it is not enough to hear that lie in the mouth of one man wearing a Confederate flag patch. I was worried that we would be open to the critique of, you just found some yahoo who believes wild things about slavery and you put him on screen. And to me, it was important to go into that world to show this is not just one person. This is an entire world. And many of these people are very nice. They will give you chili and outfit you and give you a tent. And I think those of us on this call are also familiar with people in our lives who are very nice, but believe abhorrent things about history and refuse to see certain things. So it was important for me to bring the film into that role of not just, oh, a guy saying wacky things, but like, I want the audience to be in a place where they're unsure whether they are safe and unsure whether they are liking these people or enraged at these people, because I think that that's the experience, that if you are involved in Civil War reenacting or any type of reenacting, it's really fun. It's a great, great time. I felt like I was in Massachusetts watching a James Taylor concert in terms of the family vibe. But beneath that, there's multiple levels of horror because everyone reenacting it there has this belief that slavery, when you get down to it, was pretty good. And that is the sort of sunken place horror that I want people to feel in that scene. That is absolutely what I was feeling in my body. And I think people react in that film. People tell me, CJ, I'm so disappointed in that scene because I really liked Thomas Taylor and I wanted you to flip him. And I genuinely believed that that might be the end of the movie, you know? That we might be like celebrated as a movie because we convinced one guy to leave the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And I hope that that scene makes us all wonder why we think that that might be the end of a movie. Why we place our faith in this idea of hearts and minds. When we're talking about violence against women, we're never like, you know, men and women just need to come to the table and see how much they are all human. We would never say that. We're never like, how do we go over to the other side, to the men, and show them that women are human? We would never say that. We say protect women. Make it impossible for violence against women to happen. Make it, when this happens, that those people spend their life in, you know, that they have some consequences to that. How do we protect these folks? That is not the case with race. With race, we are always like, how do we convince folks? So I want that scene, I want people to feel the pain that I am feeling in why we ever thought that the goal of racial reconciliation is convincing people who are clinging on to white supremacy that white supremacy is bad.
I think also you'll notice in that scene, the first two times you meet Thomas Taylor, it's him and CJ, and they're having an interpersonal interaction. And during those times, Thomas is pretty clear and says, yes, it was about slavery. They needed it. But when he is in a collective space with other people who are participating in this lie, there is a pressure, and he doesn't stand up for CJ. He doesn't intervene when his friends are off the cuff. And at the end of the day, he joins in and says, no way, I won't go to the Whitney. So I think there's an interesting set of dynamics about the Thomas Taylor individual who really liked CJ as a person, and the Thomas Taylor as a member of a community that had a power dynamic to protect.
And I also want to add, I believe greatly and believe more in grace, in this space that most people have not seen the documents that we talked about. And there are a great number of people, more than we expect, who are capable of changing their minds. But what I want to be firm on is that racial progress is not a matter of we just need to have dialogue. Racial progress is about protection and justice and systems and structures, and not about convincing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Carol, would you like to? Okay. Oops, sorry, I just muted you again. Sorry. Go ahead. Okay. Carol Zimmerman?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to inject this into the conversation. I believe there's a great deal of northern smugness, New England particularly, that we're fortunately outside of the ball game framework. We're so much better than the Southerners. We're not like that, this kind of intolerance. And the truth is, this is a national issue, not a Southern issue. It's just more visible, more manifest. There's something easier to deal with in the South, but there are monuments in the North as well to icons of the Confederacy. There is, we were totally startled in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to come across the African burying ground. It's a myth that slaves didn't exist outside of the South. Of course, they were here in Boston, and they were there in Portsmouth. It's a very moving monument, the African slave burying ground. And I think the protections, the acknowledgement, the reconciliation has to happen at a national level. The Northerners don't get to be holier than thou, than they, than somebody help me with the pronoun.
Right.
I agree. I agree. And that's why we fought for that Northern complicity section where you're like, wait, hold on. Robert E. Lee was made in a shop just steps off the NYU campus. Birth of a Nation was shot on a back lot in LA. You know, Gone with the Wind is LA. The book, The Lost Cause, the book where that comes from, is published in New York. Most of the minstrel songs about the South are all from Broadway and off Broadway and New York. Yes, I am not Skyping. I am zooming in from a city, New York City. I am in Manhattan right now. What's up? Where we have seen 150 monuments come down since the public lynching of George Floyd. Many of those are Columbus monuments. He's been beheaded in Boston. Shout out to Boston. He was beheaded and thrown into the sea. But I am in a town now with a circle that looks just like Lee Circle, but it is Columbus Circle, where the governor and the mayor both say he is part of our heritage. So I'm not on some mission to be like, let us strike Columbus from the land everywhere. But I do think the success of this, I do think this film will fail if the questions we are asking about Southern myths do not spill over into the questions we are asking about American myths.
And I'll say that our crew, with the exception of CJ, is almost all Southerners. We all live here, and CJ lives here part of the time too. But I consider myself a Southerner as a part of my identity. And CJ and I had this conversation a lot of times through the film, that what we're not going to do is make a film about the poor Southerners who don't know how to fix this poor, they're just so racist, until the Northerners come in and save them. What I hope we've done is showcase about Northern complicity, but it's also a story of self-determination in my mind, and the way that cities across the South are taking control of the myths of their own history. I'll also say that part of the reason it's so visible in the South is because we have the legacy of the infrastructural and systemic damage of the Confederacy and Jim Crow years that is more present, but that it is absolutely present everywhere in the United States. We have folks in California who are working on, you know, the mythologization of Spanish colonization and the damage that was done through that process. We have not yet fully reckoned with our history as a country in Japanese internment camps. And so this is a starting point, and it was a very clear and intentional and successful and complicit campaign that resulted in these statues being here. But the statues are metaphors for the Confederacy, but the statue fight is a metaphor for the way in which we don't reckon collectively with our contentious history. And we're seeing it now just in Canada. We've met somebody from Colombia who is they're working on this issue in Colombia, obviously. And so it's not even just, you know, like the North has to figure it out. We have to figure out the ways in which white supremacy and imperialism have infected our myths around history. But, and what that the implications that has for the systemic injustice.
Those international places are doing better than we are, though. They are able to talk openly about colonizers, and we are not able to do the same. You see a hesitance when folks want to talk about Andrew Jackson or even Columbus. That one of the reasons those statues came down in New Orleans is because, and Richmond and Charlottesville and, you know, Atlanta, those cities are still full of Black people. And the very dark thought I think about all the time is folks like Columbus, folks like Jackson were so successful at exterminating indigenous people that they don't make up large enough parts of those cities to be on par with what we have with Black folks in the South. That had they been slightly less effective at exterminating indigenous people, perhaps those populations would have enough people in there to remind us of what happened then. And in the same way that Black folks have a memory to say, hey, remember what this dude did? We don't have the same thing around colonizers, or the conversation is not as open in our ears.
Yeah, absolutely.
Caroline Clark has a question. Caroline?
I think you're muted, Caroline.
Still can't hear you, Caroline.
Oh, Caroline, it might be that you have to call in. Sometimes Caroline's my friend, and sometimes I know that there's.
Can you hear me now, though?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I have a comment and then a question. The first is, it was a wonderful film, and I want to thank you all for putting it together and doing it. And I'd like to comment that it's amazing to me that something this wonderful and this informative and this historically accurate piece of work would be considered illegal in some states right now, right? So, you know, this whole new lightning rod of critical race theory, which I think this would fall squarely under, it's just amazing to me that if I were in one of those places that I could be in trouble for watching this or recommending this to somebody, quote unquote, teaching it. So that's the first thing.
Yes, dumb laws.
And the second, yeah, the dumb laws. And then the second thing is, there's this one scene where there is the white young man who's clad in the white supremacist uniform. He's a young guy. And then when he's about to get his butt whooped, he takes off his shirt. And I found that scene to be so compelling. As simple as it was, I felt like he took off his shirt and somehow he didn't get his butt whooped, right? And he didn't change, he only took off his shirt. And I feel like that's kind of how the whole history of this country has been, where we didn't really change. We changed what we called things, but not how we do things. And so I just found that particular scene to be so symbolic. It just resonated really deeply for me. And then his own words, where he said, you know, it just felt good to be able to say white power, right? And I felt like it was so indicative of how deep in our psyche it is, that nobody had to really teach you that that feels good, that just felt good, right? He just knew that that felt good to say it. And that's why he said, as simple as that scene was, I have to tell you, it was one of the most memorable for me. And I thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the most haunting because I think we struggle for ways to make white privilege clear. And the idea that you can just take off your shirt and be safe, to me, captures white supremacy, captures white privilege.
In that moment, just thinking about the guys who are chasing him, like they're actual Nazis the night before, right? They're threatening and they're killing people in the streets.
They beat someone into a coma.
They beat someone into a coma, and then the next day ran over a woman and killed her. And even the guys who were going to kick this kid's ass for being a total twit, right? When he takes off his shirt and takes off the white supremacist costume, it is so ingrained in all of our heads that whiteness is normal. That is the normal condition, that all of a sudden the guys who were going to kick his butt pull up, because imagine the consequence of just kicking a random white kid's butt, right? You're no longer, he took off the white supremacist costume and then he's just a kid.
It's like,
right?
It's like capture the flag. He's like, I'm safe. I'm safe. I'm white. I'm safe. And it's like, non-white people do not have the option to take off their shirt. I have a very specific question. Sometimes people refer to him as that man, and sometimes refer to him as a kid. I think he was some age between 17 and 22. Raise your hand if experiencing that you thought of him as a boy versus a man. Raise your hand if you were like that boy who took off his shirt. Great, you can put your hands down. Now raise your hand if you think that if he was black, people would still think about a person that age as a boy. He's white, was a Nazi the night before, but because he's white, he's a boy. Even if you are like, that's detestable behavior, even in our language, we're like, when that kid takes off his shirt. And I want us to think about that. And I also, you know, these men's faces were on camera. And I was surprised and infuriated at the time how many parents were interviewed of these people. And we're like, we are so surprised. We do not know how he turned out to be a Nazi. And I do think, based on the age of those folks, and based on a lot of them were my age, and what I was taught growing up, that an entire generation of kids were raised, white kids, were raised to believe that we're all equal now. Racism ended with Dr. King, and it's your job to not pass judgment, treat everyone as equals. If they cannot see race, if they're well-meaning, baby boomer parents raise them to believe that race is not a thing, of course they are going to be susceptible to extremists who say, agreed, race is not a thing, which is why these black people and these feminists keep taking our stuff. So there is unlike the KKK conversation and unlike the Southern conversation, I do think it is a conversation about how we raise white children and what tools we give them to understand the world that they are coming in, and making sure we give them enough tools so that they're not susceptible to extremism.
I know that just from the conversations in the chat and knowing the people who are here, that we could honestly go on for hours with questions. People are so pleased with this film and all of the issues you brought up. A lot of the questions that are in the chat now are focusing about like education and education in different districts, and this point that Caroline was bringing up about critical race theory. And I know that you are working on, you mentioned it before, this website, and there's a lot that's going into trying to look at academics and how to have these conversations with people and how that we might be able to educate children. So could you really close with you talking a little bit about that and anything else you want to?
Sure, I'll give the quickest version, then Darcy can fill in any holes here. I have loved this. I've loved the intimacy of being able to talk to y'all and see your faces and just connect around this. I would love to connect more. We are on all of the social media at It's Not Neutral, on any social media at It's Not Neutral. We have a Facebook page. Just search the Neutral Ground documentary in Facebook and you can find us there. And then the easiest way is just neutralgroundfilm.com. I'll say it again, neutralgroundfilm.com. You can send us messages there. Cool. So this conversation doesn't have to end. We can keep talking. The most important thing is that I want to ask, if you have a teacher friend, if you have somebody, a professor, someone in schools who you know would love this film as much as I hope you do, you've got to tell them your job is to go home from this and tell them to watch it on the POV website. We'll drop a link for how to find that. I mean, it's as simple as typing the Neutral Ground PBS. They can type that into Google and find it. But we are streaming until August 2nd. We know that engagement drops way off when people are like, how do I find it? They can literally find it for free until August 2nd. If you have a teacher friend, go tell them. The larger question, and I'll hand it off to Darcy, is just, we're trying to do a couple things. We have lesson plans that are ready to go. So we're trying to get in schools with teachers who are like, I teach fourth graders, but I can use that 3-minute clip of the secession documents. I can't show any of the other stuff, but can I use that? So we're trying to get into as many schools as possible, work with our lesson plans that we've already developed, and also uplift folks. If you're like, my friend Jennifer teaches Black Reconstruction out of Du Bois's book and is incredible. She talks about slavery with Black kids in a way that makes them think about freedom and uplift. And she talks about white privilege with white kids in a way that is really resonant to them. We want to uplift their work too. So if you know those teachers, send them our way. And then the other thing that is a larger goal that we're playing with is that Virginia, the state of Virginia, has quietly been able to change their learning standards, the language in their learning standards, to require that teachers do teach slavery as the cause of the Civil War. Previously, it was slavery and states' rights, but now they've been able to shift that. We're trying to look at how many other districts across the country we can do, how many other states across the country we can do that. Darcy, what did I miss?
Well, I think the origin story that's kind of hinted at in the film that I wanted to make sure everybody knew is that when CJ moved to New Orleans to become a teacher, I was the teacher across the hall from him. And I taught social studies to middle schoolers for 7 years. And so have taught this exact topic, Civil War Reconstruction in the state of Louisiana, and which is part of what made the making of it so powerful, is to think through the ways we can utilize this film to improve the resources available to teachers. We have an amazing impact producer who is also, in addition to everything CJ said, working with organizations across the country that are working on things like school renaming campaigns, street renaming campaigns, and other memorial and monument takedowns. We are continuing conversations with the Southern Poverty Law Center, the ACLU Louisiana, some organizations that are doing really cool stuff around how we represent history and monuments using AR and VR in the classroom. And we want to know more, like CJ said, about teachers that are doing the work. And we also know that, like, so many teachers are doing the work within their classrooms, have never called it critical race theory because they've just you know, done their own research and consulted history and taught history that diverged from the way that the textbooks presented it. So I think there's this really beautiful through line in the film too, when we understand that textbook committees were battlegrounds themselves in this fight, and that it's going to be teachers and educators and school leaders who are going to advocate for better policies. Both, we have to do it in the legislature, but we also have to do it kind of administratively, and how we access resources and how we make cultural shifts so that teachers have what they need to do this work. Because I think most history teachers love this, right? Most history teachers are inherently trying to do this kind of critical thinking with their students.
And you know, it's in our control. You know, it's like the one thing in our control. All of us, none of us, as we've seen, can go out and change a Thomas Taylor's mind. You know, we don't have a ton of recourse against Republican governors who are passing dum-dum laws. And, you know, we've seen 17 laws, bills proposed for voter disenfranchisement. 10 of those have been dum-dum laws. 14 of those have been transphobic laws. That these are all an electoral strategy for them to, you know, make people think that the blacks are taking stuff from them instead of the fact that they've failed to provide basic health care for their own voters. But basically, we can't control any of that. But what we can control is the teacher down the hall from you, what's in their classroom. You know, like what we can control is the undergraduate professor who dates your cousin. We can control what they teach in their introductory seminar. This is where we should be spending our energy, not changing the hearts and minds of people who will never change.
And I also want to reiterate how amazing it has been to be a public media project in this country. I joke frequently that he doesn't know it, but we were actually funded during the Trump administration. So this is kind of a product. This film was actually made possible by public media during the Trump administration. And both with ITVS, PBS, we have support from the Center for Asian American Media, Black Public Media, and our show partner, POV. This is for America, and it is free to Americans through August 2nd. It is a free benefit. So the thing,
free to millions.
If you want an action item to leave the screening, this event from, it's that you should tell all your Americans, all your friends that are also Americans, that they should watch it before August 2nd.
Thank y'all so much. And thank you guys for making the space, Kim and Susan and all of you. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening, for this amazing film, for sharing it. Everybody, please feel free to wave, say thank you.